So as John said, I'm Laura, and I own a company called Kaizen Marketing, and we're a full-service communications company, and a lot of times people get confused of what that actually means. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the steps for you. And what we do is we specialize in helping professional service providers identify and integrate tools that will help them increase the effectiveness of their communications. So at our company, we deal exclusively with entrepreneurs and nonprofit organizations. And these particular groups tend to fall into two problem areas that they face quite often, which is either a lack of a communications budget, which makes communicating or marketing tough, or they lack the resources to properly execute or implement. So for us, what this means is this heightens the importance of making sure that every time we have an attempt to go to the market and reach out, that we're increasing the likelihood of being heard and getting the results of what we're trying to do. So what we've done is we've really simplified the communications process to be able to take what is very theoretical on one level and break it down to a very practical element. So like I said, we're going to be able to do this in 3 steps using 2 very simple principles. So everybody has a piece of paper with them and a pen. I'm going to make you work a little bit this morning. So with the first side, what you want to probably do is flip that over, take your pen, because we're going to talk about the 2 principles first, because I'm a believer that you learn by actually doing and implementing. If I were to just print it out, you read it over quickly and it doesn't necessarily be absorbed quite so fast. So what we want to do using these 2 principles, the first one is something that we've developed at Kaizen, and it's called the AIM principle. A-I-M-M. And the first part of this that we really want to focus on whenever we're doing anything from a communication standpoint is we want to understand who our audience is. Because we know that whether we're talking to a 6-year-old or if we're talking to a 16-year-old or a 60-year-old, we're going to have to make some changes and adjustments to how we're talking, the tone, our tonage, our tonation. We want to be able to make sure that we're changing our language, our communication style. So that's the first thing we really want to stop and identify. And a lot of times people get so caught up in what they want to say or how they want to say it that they really don't take the time to identify and narrow down who specifically they're talking to and how that should be implemented on their communication style. So the second one is we want to really be able to identify what's the intent. What's the purpose? What is our intention? If we're going to talk, a lot of people talk for the sake of talking. And that contributes to a lot of the noise we have, which is why people disregard a lot of what people are trying to say. And what we really want to do is make sure we have clear intentions before we start talking. The next one is the method that we're using. So just from the audience, what are some methods that we can use very commonly in day-to-day that we would use to communicate?
Email.
So email. Twitter. So social media. Telephone. People don't use that one quite so often anymore. Coffee, so that face-to-face. Any other ones? We don't really send letters too much anymore. But we can see that depending on what our intention is and who we're talking to, we want to actually give some thought to how we're sending that message. What's the method that we're going to use? Some things aren't best done over social media or over a quick text message or necessarily in an email if we know that people can't understand our tone and they can misunderstand what we're saying, and then this leads to miscommunication, which takes even more time. So when we talk about things being efficient, not always the best. And sometimes it's best to have that face-to-face conversation and really understand how everything starts to come together and being able to read people's body language while you're discussing things with them. And then the last part is your message. This is what a lot of people jump right to. And this is how you're going to, number one, what are you going to say, and how are you going to say what you're going to say? And this is where we look at what the message is, and we look at the 3 preceding steps and start to ask ourselves, okay, do I need to adjust anything in how I'm communicating this message based on who I'm talking to, what my intention is, and the form of what this communication is going to be? So now that we know what the message is, we have the second principle, which is developed. And this is where we start to get into a little bit more of the intricate details of communication. And this is the AIDA principle. So AIDA. Because we know if we're going to communicate with people, what we want to do is we want to make sure that any communication we have is effective. So if we're going to be effective in our communications, the first thing we need to do is secure people's attention. Because we know, statistics tell us, that the average person is exposed to more than 3,000 messages a day. There's a lot of noise happening. There's a lot of communication. There's a lot of people that are trying to say things, a lot of people that are trying to sell you things. So what we need to be able to do is to make sure, like on the simplest level, what we're talking about is just getting the right message in front of the right people at the right time. If you can master those three things, you're a marketing genius. All of your communications will be very effective. It's a lot harder to do than it sounds. So this is the type of thing that we know that we have to make sure that we get their attention. What does that actually mean? Quite simply, we have to be relevant. If we're relevant to somebody, we're more likely to get their attention. This flows right in to once we have their attention, now what are we going to do with it? And we have to capture their interest. And this is one of those things that a lot of people, they miss the mark on. Everybody has in the back of their head this question of what's in it for me? And if we don't appeal to that, and we aren't upfront with being able to capture their interest, of being able to clearly communicate and understand that everybody is going through this filtering process, then we've missed the mark. And at this point, everything else, anybody have those conversations where everybody just, you start talking, we've got their attention, and then we start talking and we don't ever answer that question of what's in it for me, and you can just see the person tune out. And they slowly drift away and the eyes start to kind of gloss over. We've missed our opportunity. We had a chance to get their interest, and we didn't. So once we've secured their attention, we have their interest, what this means is we actually have to follow through on that interest and engage them. We have to be able to spark a desire. And if we're able to spark that desire in people, we're able to start to get to a little bit closer to what we actually want them to do. You can't force anybody to do anything. And when we're communicating with them, we want them to come to this natural realization on their own. Because everybody knows that if somebody thinks of it themselves, it's a much better idea. So this is the type of thing that what we want to be able to do is from a communication standpoint, we want to be able to understand who we're talking to so that we're able to hit the emotional triggers that are going to get these people to take the action we want them to take, and that we're going to get them to be able to resonate. What we're saying makes sense to them. And there's that constant connection that's being made now. Because now we've followed through with what we've said. We've followed through with that intention that we're trying to lead them to. And the last step here is the action. So we have their attention, we have their interest, we've created a desire. Now specifically, what do we want them to do or not do? Because this applies to business as much as it does in regular, everyday communications. So if we follow these simple principles, now we're in a much better position to be able to identify what somebody is motivated by, what inspires somebody, and how do we get that to be able to just tweak our communications just a little bit. So what I want to do now that we have these very simple processes, I want to be able to apply these principles to what we actually do to build our business and to be able to build our brand. So now if you look on the other side of this piece of paper, we're going to look at this one step further and see how we can start to use these two principles and apply these to our everyday communications. So as everybody, I just want to get just a quick show of hands. How many people here have identified who their target market is? Okay, does anybody want to share who their target market is?
Depending on the style of photography, like putting commercial photography aside, for say portraiture, my ideal client is someone who values photography and would be interested in using it as home decor.
Very good. Anybody else?
I own Oxford Learning, so our target market is women between the ages of 35 and 50, and middle or upper income.
Okay.
Businesses that are passionate about their community and they want to give a hand.
Okay, who else?
I'm in magazine advertising, and my ideal client is someone who has a message that they would like to portray to various readers.
So we can see we have a pretty broad range of who we're looking at in terms of a target market. And what we want to be able to do, because for the most part, a target market is very general in one sense. It usually touches on demographics. We have some, you've touched on something that they value, so that we're starting to get into the psychographic side of things. But when we're looking at a target market, we want to take that one step further and actually identify what we would consider to be our ideal client. And this is working off the premise that once you've established your business, it's okay that not everybody that might be in the market for what you sell is an ideal client. And that is probably one of the most empowering realizations that you can make as a business owner, is to identify who that right fit is. Who is the ideal client for you? And to do this, what we need to be able to do is to briefly summarize who our ideal client is. So in addition to the demographics that a lot of target markets look at, because they can be very broad in range. We had from roughly 30s to 50s, and it was women, correct? So that's a relatively broad range. So what we want to be able to do now is to get a little bit more into what we consider the psychographic side of human nature. And we want to understand what are values that this person holds. And if we narrow it down and we don't necessarily look at the broad range, because a lot of people, they think, well, if we're too narrow in who we've identified as our market, then we're going to cut off too many people, and we're going to turn away business. And that's just a bad thing. But we know we have to narrow things down if we're going to actually be heard by people. So what we want to understand is, what do these people value? What are some of the attitudes that they hold? What is their lifestyle? What is the socioeconomic state? Because we're going to have to answer two very important questions here, which get down to, once we've identified the basic characteristics of who this person is, we need to first look at whether or not this person has a willingness to spend. Because a lot of times, unless you're just looking to communicate for the greater good, a lot of times there's an action that's going to require people to spend a little bit of money on what you do. Most businesses require revenue to stay afloat. So this is where we want to be able to make sure that we're identifying our ideal market by first making sure that people are willing to spend. And the second one, which is usually the hook and where most ideas fall through, is that they have the ability to spend. And at this point, this is where we're starting to be able to identify who an ideal client is. So I just want everybody to take a moment to just jot down who your ideal client is. And it's okay to start to get specific in looking at ranges of household income. It might be educational levels. Depending on your business, it might trend onto political or religious views. Okay, so now that we've been able to do that, we want to be able to build on this, and we know that we have to next capture interest. If we're going to follow that second principle, now we have to make sure that we're able to not only capture their interest, but create a desire. And this is to really understand the value based on what your ideal client, views as relevant. And for us to be able to do this, we need to take a moment and think of, what is the actual value that this service provides? So I just want to take a moment and just kind of jot down that one. And this one is a little bit more difficult. Because it's not only the value of what we say is important. We can think it's as important as we want. If we're not able to communicate that value to the market that we need to, we're going to have a disconnect that's going to happen. And you're not going to necessarily get the results you want. So just take a moment and think about the value. One of the things that we know, if we think back to the principle of what we are looking at, is that in order to be able to communicate and speak about something that's relevant, then and only then can we actually communicate a message that will resonate with people. And we don't want people to just hear what we say. We want to be able to plant a seed. We want this to communicate and be something that they think about even after you've had a discussion. And I think everybody's met people that they've talked about they've talked to, and you've had a discussion that was intellectually stimulating, and you've actually thought about it hours later, or days later, or weeks later. So this is what we want to be able to do. This is what we're talking about when we say we're engaging somebody. It goes a little bit beyond just that surface level of communications. So now that we've done that, what we want to be able to do is take the relevant message and what we've talked about with resonating, because so far at this point we've satisfied out of that IDA principle, we have their attention, we've created some interest, we have a desire. Now, chances are, unless we're just a spokesperson, we want them to take action. And we want them to be able to not only see value in, for example, family photography, we want them more likely than not to do business with us. And this requires us to set ourselves apart and differentiate our services from our competitors. Because we know that in a crowded marketplace, we don't only have direct competitors, we have indirect competitors, and there's substitute products. So there's a lot of ways. We've created this desire. And if we haven't identified that willingness and ability to spend, we can very easily hit the mark and communicate a lot and not get results. So what we want to be able to make sure what we're doing here is that we're able to carve this so that we're going to get people to do business with us. Because if we actually take what branding is, it's being able to differentiate yourself from everything else that exists and to have people, your ideal consumers, see you as the only choice. It's not, well, I can do this and I can do this, and where a lot of people fall into the trap of not taking that moment to identify how they're unique and differentiate themselves. They become what we refer to as Me Too companies. Oh yeah, I do that too, me too, me too. And it's just this trend where now we have a commodity. Everybody's doing the exact same thing. And when you have a commodity, what happens? The market will dictate the price, and prices will go down and down and down. And this is the type of thing that when building a brand or building a business that's profitable, a profitable venture, we want to be able to start to take control of that. And we can take control of that by taking control of our communications. So I just want everybody to take a moment and just identify what your unique position is. And we want to do it in a way that is relevant to your client. There's only 3 questions, but they're getting increasingly more difficult, right? So I'll give you a minute on that one.
Can you spend another minute with that, please?
To discuss that a little bit further, the differentiation. When we're talking about it, we're talking about differentiating ourselves and creating. So we've talked about value at this point. So I'm just going to use you, Robert, as an example. Hope you don't mind. So if we take family photography, we've gotten their attention. Families grow very quickly. We need to capture that moment. So we're getting people that go, yeah, it happens. I can't believe I'm already sending my child off to first grade. So we've captured their attention. We have their interest. Once we've gotten to the desire part, now we know that if we do not differentiate ourselves and we've led somebody right up to this point, how do we get them to do business with Robert? Or are they just going to, take the photo with their iPhone? Are they going to, they have a brother-in-law that has a camera, so they're just going to get them to take a photo. So we have direct competitors and indirect competitors. So we need to be able to explain what we do in such a manner that all of those substitute products aren't going to be good enough. The taking out, the cell phone and snapping the shot, yes, it captures the moment, but are they going to be able to do it the same way that a professional can? And this is the difference, and this is where we specialize in working with people that have a service. It's not a product. Products are a little bit easier. Sometimes it's easier if you have a tangible to be able to sell. For the first part is you have to first sell the service, the value of that service, because that's very much what you have. It might, in later steps, turn into a tangible. But what we really have to be able to do is to differentiate that personal brand, that personal perspective. So what is it that's unique to you? Because you're not just a photographer.
One of the things we find is the terminology you use makes a huge, huge difference. We don't say your enlargement. We talk about wall decor. Mm-hmm. And that takes what we do to a completely different place in the minds of the client. So instead of just saying, well, would you be interested in ordering some prints? We talk about how they'd like to decorate their home. And those kinds of terminologies are what make all the difference in sales.
Yeah, so and what we're doing is we're taking something that is what other people are saying, oh, we do this too, and we do this too, and being able to integrate it into something that increases the value. And automatically, when you're having that conversation with them, I can bet you more times than not, they're sitting on the other side of the phone and they're visualizing this. Now they're seeing this photograph above the mantle or in the living room. And that's what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to walk somebody through these steps that allow them to see us as not just a service provider, not just one of many, but as somebody that's going to fulfill their exact need. So has everybody had a moment just to kind of jot that one down?
I have a little problem, though, getting between the difference of how you provide value and then what your unique position is. They're kind of looking sort of similar to me.
At one point, okay, what was your example for how you provide value?
Maybe I've got this wrong. It says, great customer experience, product created as a result of combined ideas. The creative process includes the client. They have ownership of the portrait. I make portraiture a comfortable and easy process.
Okay, now you can see how you've created value. If we had a room full of other professional photographers, some of those similarities might be on their piece of paper as well. So what we want to be able to do is how do we differentiate from that? Okay, you can make it a comfortable process. I bet if we had 5 other photographers in here, they would say that they make it a comfortable process too. So what does that actually mean? And this is where we start to look at what our experience is, who we like as an ideal client. Are there particular types of families? Are there particular types of weddings that you like to photograph? And this is where when we start to get deeper into the ideal client, we're able to carve out kind of what our specialty is. And that's what we're able to do to really set our services apart from somebody else's. I'll just use our company for example. We provide value by helping businesses communicate more effectively. There are a lot of marketing companies or advertisers or graphic designers that will say the exact same thing. But in most businesses, talk is cheap. It all comes down to actions. So for us, how are we unique? Well, with a background in consumer behavior, we understand how people think a little bit more. We don't simply produce a nice image. We want to make sure that we're implementing marketing metrics. So if this marketing piece looks great, is it working? Because it's very much an iterative process. We don't assign one artist to a project. We have 3 different artists that will work on a project. So we're able to make sure that that style is best reflective of what the brand is. So that's how we have a unique value versus another marketing company. And that's where you want to be able to identify where those values are, because the value is the same. You can talk to 5 different companies, and we'll probably all start to say the same thing. And that's where we really want to be able to identify that we're just not somebody else. Yes, the elements, the trade, the functioning, the theory, the practical nature, yes, all of those come into play. But even your communication style could be completely different. You can set 2 companies up on paper side by side. They both look exactly the same. I might communicate a little bit more casually than somebody else. If that's going to resonate with my consumer or my market, then we're going to maybe get action that we wouldn't have been able to get from somebody else that would be very stiff in their approach. So those are something that's unique to you. That's how you engage with somebody. And this is where we get to the most important part of what marketing is or communications is or anything from a branding perspective. And it's being able to take all of these elements and combine them into the relationship. Because only once we know what is relevant to somebody and what resonates with somebody and what they value, can we start forming a relationship. And that's ultimately what we want to be able to do. We don't want to look at communicating and communications and marketing and advertising as just a means. We want to look at it as part of the process of discussing things, creating a dialogue, and being able to collect and gather information so that we can enhance the relationship and make elements of this relationship mutually beneficial. And this is where we start to engage people. And we talk about creating value. And when we talk about creating value, we mean sometimes you have to give before you can take. And this all comes back to realizing that it's not transactional. For most businesses, unless you have that widget that we're just going to pump 1,000 of these out the door, it's about the relationship that we form with people. And we can only do that by creating value. So as you can see, a lot of us might have a small business, but from the communication side of things, your brand doesn't have to be small.